Hello, scholars. My name is Ira McIntosh, and this is Hypothesis. Hey everyone, welcome back to my office. It's time for another episode of Hypothesis, and let's see if we get through this today because you may not know this, but I live in France, and so we are dealing with the canicule, the heat wave here, and I I have not been able to think straight for the past 2 weeks. So sorry that these episodes have been a little bit cattywampus during the summer. I mean, it's summer anyway, right? No one's in school, so you get you get a little bit of extra break in between episodes right now. But I finally got some sleep last night because it cooled down 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's time to get some new podcasts out because I have some incredible episodes coming up and some incredible conversations with some amazing researchers. So I'm excited to get these conversations to you. Just a quick note, I'm going to be starting some new little mini episodes on this podcast. So one of the big parts of that is I need my guests' participation. If you have any questions that come up from episodes that you've listened to, or questions about academia, or just, questions about life, but preferably about questions about the episodes, please submit those because I would like to get a chance to answer those for you in these mini episodes. You can submit questions via email at it's podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. Again, if you'd like to submit those by email, it's podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. You could also submit questions to us on our Instagram at I can't remember any of our socials. That's how long it's been. At Hypothesis Pod on Instagram, at Hypothesis Pod. Or you can submit an audio question to us if you'd like to hear your voice on the podcast at speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. That's speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. So I mean that's all of the stuff we have to get get out of the way up here at the top of the podcast. But today's episode was one that I've been looking forward to for a while because the researcher that I had a conversation with is a friend of mine. We mentioned in the episode, but we have interviewed each other for our academic projects. And a lot of our research kind of overlaps in terms of topics. So we were able to kind of dig deep. So hopefully we translated all of the academic lingo that needs to be translated in this conversation. If not, again, please feel free to write in those questions. Today we're talking about identity formation and collective trauma. We're talking about whether experiences have to be remembered in order to affect our lives. And we also talk about whether or not academic skills are transferable to non-academic jobs. So if you are someone who wants to be in academia more, but are worried that you're going to be kind of wasting your time and not gathering real world knowledge for how to get through life, this is going to be a great episode for you to listen to. My guest today is Michael Patrick Vaughn, who is a sociologist and witch with a lifelong obsession with queerness, identity, trauma, and the fragility of memory. Michael's research has run the gamut from clinical to social to psychological to cultural and looping back around to clinical again. She currently works as a user experience researcher, informing how digital products are built and could be built. In the past, she has identified herself as a social scientist, PhD in sociology and gender and sexuality studies, and before that, a social worker, and before that, a shop girl and a wild child, and before that, a junior playwright. She is currently rediscovering her identity through creative nonfiction writing. Stay tuned for the exciting conclusion. Everyone, please welcome to the pod, Michael Patrick Vaughn. Speaking about our conversations together, we have both interviewed each other for each other's academic work. Can you start us off by talking about your academic background and where that has kind of led you?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a meandering path, so I'll try to trace it with as high fidelity as I can. So in undergrad, I studied sociology and psychology, and the reason I even started there was because my high school program had a social science research like track. We ended up doing these like small experiments. We would spend like 3 years doing one study, and it like dawned on me at like 17. I was like, oh, research is cool. Like I like that. And so it led me to psychology, which led me to sociology. Leaving college with a degree in social and psych, I was like, oh, okay, so I'm going to be a social worker, clearly. And so I did 3 semesters of an MSW and realized very quickly I love the theory and the practice is not for me. I'm not a clinician in my heart. So I talked to my undergrad advisor, and she gave me a list of 12 sociology programs. She was like, you're supposed to be an academic. It's in your heart. I've known that since the day I met you. Here's where you're applying. I know you're indecisive. Go. And I applied to those 12. And um, luckily, I got into my number one and my number 12. So it was a very easy decision. It was an anomaly. But so that's how I ended up doing my PhD in sociology. I focused in my graduate work on social psychology, cultural sociology, and then gender studies. And what that looked like was a dissertation that was examining the ways in which gay men understand what does it mean to be gay and how does collective medical trauma influence that identity and may it really subdivide what we think is a cohesive group into lots of different subgenerations that don't map neatly into our millennial Gen X, Gen Z framework. Um, After finishing my dissertation, I moved more squarely into public health because I graduated 2020. So this was COVID, there was public health funding, and there wasn't much else. So I stayed in public health and medicine for about 2 years. My postdoc was focused on cabotegravir, so like injectable HIV medications. I worked in that space for about 2 years. And I found that I was kind of falling out of love with academia. And I found that being in high stakes research spaces, like people could die if I don't do something right, it was hard to go to bed. It was hard to put it down. So then I pivoted into UX research. And so for the last 3 or so years, I've been working in tech. And right now I work at a large financial institution doing UX research.
So, uh, just to clarify, did you for some reason I had it in my mind that you didn't finish your doctorate, but you must have finished your
I
doctorate.
did. Yes.
What because I feel like there was drama there and I misconstrued the drama.
There, there was drama. There were a lot of different opinions about how one can show up in academia.
Mm,
And there were a lot of different opinions about the ways in which folks can provide support or be either an escalator or a roadblock for you. And so I did graduate and I have the diploma on the wall behind my screen. I can't take that away from me. I'm always going to become a PhD. Um,
grasping that.
yeah, and the other piece, which is really, I think the confusion was also on me as a newbie, was that moving from sociology, which is more hard money focused, these guaranteed
Mm,
faculty lines, into public health, which is more soft money grant funded. It was a really steep learning curve to understand that in sociology, you apply for jobs and there's 10 jobs and 1,000 applicants if we're in a good year. In public health or in more soft money roles, it's truly if you can write the grants, you get the job. And I think it took me a long time to catch up to that. And
mm.
once I caught up to that, I realized that wasn't necessarily the kind of economy I wanted to be existing in.
That's totally fair. I mean, even talking about your undergrad, doing both soc and psych must have been very interesting because those are two disciplines that, while they do go hand in hand and they mesh very well, d- tend to have kind of a rough relationship.
Absolutely. And so I would say my experience with that has been that sociology is really rich with theory and really rich with cultural context. And psychology is really rich with these like deeply scientific, rigorous methods and can
Hmm.
make much stronger claims. And so I mean, this is a theme within my life. I refuse to choose one side. Like I was not going to live in that social or psych binary. Um, and so I had these very long taglines of I was a sociological social psychologist with an emphasis in experimental psychology. It was like things like that, where I was like, I'm going to give you lots of words, it's almost word salad to make you
Yeah.
see that I'm not going to sit on one side. But they don't naturally come together in a way that I think they could.
They absolutely could and should. And it's really funny because sometimes sociologists will use a certain term that psychologists also use, but they use it in a different context. And so then all of a sudden you're completely confused as to what you're actually talking about, even though you think you're talking about the same things. I mean, in undergrad, I took Psych 101 because I thought I was interested in psychology and I didn't know what sociology was at the time. So it wasn't even on my radar. It's why I stayed in music. It's why I have 2 degrees in music and then switched to communications. And now I'm going to sociology because no one explained it to me at the time. I thought I was interested in how brains worked. And I thought I was interested in how individuals moved within themselves. And then I took Psych 101 and I was like, oh, I couldn't care less. Like I don't care how your internal world is working. I want to know how you're relating to people. And I didn't understand that that was sociology. And once I did, I was like, oh, of course, that's what I want to do. But yeah, it's so weird that the two are they're so separate that I could take
Yeah.
a psych course and not
Mhm.
know what sociology was.
It is bananas. And I think it's especially strange because so a good portion of my academic career is focused on identity as a concept. And so I was
Mhm.
framing myself as an identity scholar in many ways. And so moving from soc to psych, the word identity literally is a different definition. Even though if you talk to a human on the street, and they'll have my identity, my social security number, it's like who I am, it's my
Mhm.
name, it's doing my driver's license. What are you talking about? Like identity is a very simple concept on the surface, but social and psych talk so differently. Um, when I began my graduate work, my goal was to be a neurosociologist. I don't know if I ever told you that.
Mm-mm.
So I have the neuropsychology handbook behind me still. Yeah. So it was like my goal was to be in one of these.
Wow.
And so what I pitched to Emory to get into grad school was to study the biological bases for sociological identity theories. And so things like how do like oxytocin levels when we touch influence the way that we understand like the idea of a community, like things like that, or like what are the biological ways that influence or impact our like social bonding or our identity formation and maintenance. um I, similar to you, took about a year of endocrinology classes, and I realized very quickly I was like, I can't do this. This is I candidly, I took AP Chem and AP Bio in high school and didn't take science classes in college. And so I had not taken a science class since I was 18. And I was like, I, as a 30-year-old, cannot be sitting here trying to remember what a proton is. Like, I,
Yeah.
I pivoted quickly.
That's something that I'm nervous about with PhD work because I know I'm going to have to take a stats class at some point, and I
Mhm.
haven't taken math since my elementary ed math course in undergrad back in 2009. So that's going to be it's going to be a
Yep.
rude awakening and I'm going to have to suffer through it, but that's how school goes.
It will be
But
humbling, and you will just get that B minus and you'll move on.
yeah. Well, and sorry to continue
Yeah.
harping on sociology versus psychology, but it's even funny that we'll use some of the same theorists
Mhm.
in very different ways. I mean, the I follow a few psychologists on TikTok, and every once in a while, of course, they'll bring up Freud and how much of an
Mhm.
idiot he was, and like how no one listens to him anymore. And I'm over here just like, um, so in sociology and communications, he's actually kind of important to us still. Just because like social interactionism and things like that, the his like base interaction theories are still wildly credible to sociologists, at least in Europe. Meanwhile, in America, the psychologists are just like, nah, it's all crock. We don't care. And it's just like, okay, we have to decide on something here because
I was gonna say,
it's just so funny.
in like an American academic space, I was always looked at as really crazy for talking about Freud. And so like Freud's concept of hauntings are really important in my academic life. None of my sociology faculty really ever read Freud because it was so outside of their expertise. So hearing you say that you knew sociologists and know them who play in that
Well, in
space, I'm feeling
Europe,
envy.
he's extremely highly spoken about in at least in communications theory because of
Mm,
his social interactions theories.
yeah.
Um, and how again with that identity formation, because he talked a lot about identity formation, not only intrapersonally but interpersonally. And while the intrapersonal identity formation is the kind of like the oral anal phallic that kind of
Mhm.
stuff, or kind of like, okay, you're telling us too much about yourself, Sigmund. um
Me
but in
search.
the exactly, really he was just doing ethnographic research and telling us that it was everyone else's problem. um
Mhm.
but but in terms of the interpersonal communications, he had a lot of really good ideas in how our identities form around groups of people and how we interact with them. So yeah, it's always fun to have those conversations where the psychologists are just like, yeah, you're crazy for thinking there's something worth using there, and I'm just like, but how can you not?
Those hot takes, and I know I'm going to get flack for calling it a hot take, but those hot takes always make me laugh because I'm like, show me where the theory doesn't work. Show me where the
mm,
argumentation falls out, and I will totally hear you. And
yeah.
I loved being in women's studies and gender studies spaces because everyone was such a strong theorist that they could say, yeah, well, this claim doesn't mesh with this claim. So you can't use Freud in this space because the theorizing around the self doesn't mesh with your theorizing of whatever. Like it you can just, if you can diagram it for me, I will believe you. I just
Yeah,
don't trust someone who can't draw the diagram.
and that's completely fair. I think there are so many ways to connect theories and theorists, and I don't ever feel like you have to take all of someone's theories together. Like there are things I love. I love Judith Butler and I love Bell Hooks and I love all of these people who are really integral to my research. But every
Mhm.
once in a while they'll say something that I'm like, that doesn't that doesn't fully mesh with my experience. So maybe I'll leave that like grain of rice out, but the rest of it I'm good with.
And like one of my mentor or one of my women's studies professors would always say like if you need a hammer, get a hammer. If you need a spanner, get a spanner. Like you just take the like
Mm,
if theories are tools, we have to use the tool to build something. If we get so precious about our tools, I don't think we're gonna build anything.
yeah. Well, so okay, so you were talking about your research into identity formation
Mhm.
and how you were looking at generations outside of the Gen X, the millennial,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. Could you tell me a little bit more about those kind of delineations that you found? Because I went through some articles that talked about how gay men are delineated by like pre-AIDS, post-AIDS,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just curious what you found in your research.
Yeah, so I would say the top line that I found is that what's happening on a collective level at the time when your identity is really solidifying or crystallizing is what creates the flavor. And so, to give a specific example, when I interviewed folks who were in their, so again, I was doing these interviews in the 2010s. If they interviewed folks in their 70s and the 80s, they were talking about if you're going to understand being gay, you need to understand the I'll call it criminalizing, but that's like a loaded term. So it could be the medicalizing where this is a diagnosis and you're going to get put away. It could be this will be in the newspaper and you will be outed. This will you could lose your job, whatever. So the act of disclosure being incredibly vulnerable, that's medicalized and criminalized, that was something that they talked a lot about. And if you're ever curious to find these kind of generational divides in your own space, listen for when people say, okay, if you're going to understand this, you first need to understand that. And whenever there's an order of events you need to understand. So if I was talking, imagine me 31 or probably like 29, interviewing someone in their late 70s. I'm like, oh, what does it mean to be gay? And I would always ask this really, like, I say as if you don't know this, but like I would always ask this like question that was super provocative. And I was like, there's no one answer. I'm gonna be real, I'm gonna be like a whatever about it. Um, Folks would always say, okay, whoa. We can't go there. First, you need to understand this. So
Mm.
for this older generation, it was disclosure as something that's criminalizing and medicalizing. And so being gay is a diagnosis. Being gay is something that I could lose my job for. I could go to jail for these things. Um, and then those folks would describe the HIV epidemic as a disruption to an identity that already existed. And so if I've already have what it means to be gay is crystallized, then something new happens. It's disrupting or impacting, but it's not changing the formation. It's changing, not influencing the formation. For folks who were just really coming to terms with their sexuality at the beginning of the HIV and AIDS epidemic, so we're thinking like 70s, 80s, these are the folks who would talk about, okay, if you're going to understand gay, you need to understand AIDS. You need to understand HIV. You need to understand the fear. You need to understand, and this is a narrative we see a lot in media. And oftentimes that becomes the single story of gay identity. It's HIV, and then there's before, during, and after. That's not necessarily the story that I find most interesting because it still always makes gay equal pandemic, gay equal death. Like
Yeah.
it, and that's powerful if you're an activist, but if you're an academic trying to understand a group or just a layperson, I don't think it's very useful. So
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
the second generation talked a lot about you need to understand HIV because that was integral to the way that I came out and came up. And the a third generation I would think of as folks who are growing up in a current moment now where we're having broader conversations about gender, we're having broader conversations about sexuality. Things aren't just a binary gay straight. That's not necessarily the words we're using. And folks would talk about HIV as a medically managed condition. So it's a chronic condition. Diabetes was a common analogy where it's like, if you don't take your medicine, you could get really sick. But also, like, if you take your medicine, you're probably going to be fine. And this is very like a Western American perspective on HIV. Um, but the storyline for that younger generation, who are now probably in their they were at least 18 when I was interviewing them. So I guess they would be like 20s, 30s, maybe early 40s. These folks were saying, yeah, being gay means something else. And it's like, we're still figuring it out. We don't have a clear idea, but like that medical stuff doesn't work. The criminalization isn't necessarily the point. It was a lot of like, we have these preconceived notions, we have all these sad stories that we put on an identity category, and it's not that doesn't fit right. And so,
Mm.
as I talked about that generation, they're still crystallizing, and maybe they've gotten there. If I redid my study now, maybe we have a new generation emerging, especially with this like rise of fascism. I would predict that we have
Mm.
that generation that was figuring it out and rejecting sad stories has probably crystallized. And folks who are in like high school, college, 20 something now are probably crystallizing around this like resistance to fascism, if I had to
Yeah.
crystal ball it. Um, yeah.
I mean, the reason I asked, and you probably saw me turn away and grab something and come back. That was me grabbing my thesis research that happened to be sitting behind me because I've been looking through it again. Because I was curious because one of my big sources in my thesis was Philip Hammack, and
Mm.
his study in gay men's health and identity and how social change affected generations, and basically came up with the same thing, in that there the like big thing that was happening when we were adolescents is kind of what fulfilled that identity for gayness for us moving
Mhm.
forward. um but yeah, I wish I could talk to more young people now, like you were saying, and know how they think about it, because it almost feels like we're in a I'm this is probably the completely the wrong term for it, but almost like a post gay identity world, in that there, because of social media and because of politics and things like that, seeing yourself as identifying as being gay or identifying as being all of these labels is starting to kind of not dissipate, but become less of a like, this is the first thing that I'm going to talk about and this is what's in my bio on my Instagram, or I guess whatever the kids are using nowadays. They're back to Snapchat or whatever,
Yeah. Yep.
whatever,
Yeah.
showing my age here. But yeah, it's so interesting how the attitudes around queerness when you're an adolescent is really how you see yourself as an adult and what kind of crystallizes into that identity moving forward.
So something I would say, and this is where I really like dig into queer theory in my own work, is that I don't buy that age and identity formation are paired. I don't buy that. And one of the reasons I
Interesting.
say that is we both have had like vibrant lives in queer spaces. We know I don't know, but I know that you know so many people who have discovered their queerness at a later in life time. So it could be
Mm,
in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and they go through an adolescence in that time. So I think adolescence as a metaphor is incredibly powerful. I think
yeah.
adolescence as 13 to 19 is not helpful. And that's one of the things I try to push against because if in the model that I proposed, if someone lived through the HIV and AIDS epidemic, the height of the mortality rate, but never came out, never acknowledged their queerness, and today is grappling with it, they're probably going to match more closely to that young generation that's crystallizing right now in the face of fascism than they would to the people who were at the bathhouses in the 80s. And that's
Yeah.
because they'll have shared experiences and they will be enacting the identity. That's not to say that that person wasn't queer in the 70s and 80s, but it's to say that if they're, this is where I lean on like Irving Goffman a lot. If you're enacting your identity and you're like doing it on the front stage, you're going to have a different experience than if you're not. So I always just caution folks because I think there's something about like adolescence that becomes really precious and really like this is the time that has to be perfect and there's so much pressure. It's like, no, when are you trying something new? When are you exploring and figuring it out? That's the time when you're really crystal is always the thing I go back to. It's always like crystallizing. This is when it's becoming something. It goes from an idea to a lived experience that's sticky.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I'm glad you bring up Goffman because he's one of my favorite theorists. He, again, very pivotal to my research. Mostly because when I was researching social media, he became really important because of that front stage, backstage, and looking at social media as a front stage and your real life as a backstage. So kind of morphing his theory a little bit. But that's where I kind of come to this conclusion that identity is uh a little less pivotal for the younger generations than it was maybe for us because they're able to experiment with different identities constantly online in ways that we
Mm.
couldn't in real life.
Mm.
Um, and I don't have a full thought on that. Clearly,
Yeah.
that was just a master's thesis, and I have a lot to
Not
research further
just,
into that. Well,
don't
no,
just
but
that.
no, but the way I look at a master's thesis is it's like you're opening the door onto your research. You're not, that's not your like finished thoughts. You're basically
Okay.
your finished thesis is a hypothesis.
I
Um
okay. I just want to
it's
make sure
the
that we're not denigrating our
no no
work
no no no
because your
no.
work is phenomenon.
Well, thank you. But no, I just mean that my own opinions on that haven't fully formed yet because I haven't finished that research. But
Mhm.
that's why I think Goffman is such an important theorist in that respect, because I think we can really dig into people's presentations of themselves. And I think Dana Boyd talks about this a lot too in her research of how you can experiment with your identity and online in ways that you
Mhm.
never could offline, and you can have
Yeah.
multiple identities online, and of course those identities can collapse in on each other and you can accidentally let the wrong thing slip in the wrong place and then everyone knows everything, which is part of the fun of the internet. It's that game of like, ooh, what will people find out?
Hmm.
But but no, I think that's why this arena of research is really fascinating to me, because I hate to say it, but the old adage of people go into psychology because they have issues that they're trying to figure out. I feel like there are a lot of queer theorists within sociology simply because we are all looking for community and trying to figure out how people relate to each other.
Oh yeah. Oh
Because
yeah.
as queer people, we at least up to a certain point, we couldn't relate to other people because we
Mhm.
didn't know there were other queer people around us because of being in the closet and such. So
Mhm.
I think we move forward into adulthood not understanding how to relate. And so studying people relating to each other kind of scratches that itch.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when we blow up identity categories, like you're saying that you're seeing in younger generations, it does have the potential to make it harder to create spaces where people can explore identity in person. And so what it makes me
Mm,
think of is like the loss of gay bars in our current like in the United States means that adults, usually 21 plus, maybe 18 plus, are having fewer and fewer spaces that are specifically coded for an identity category.
mhm,
And we could have a lot of like theoretical talks about whether or not identity categories are useful or not, but the lived experience you're describing, people don't have that. And youths in particular have even fewer of those because there are just fewer third spaces that youths can go to. It's school, it's home, everything else costs money. And like very few of those are queer coded for children or adolescents. So I
yeah.
think your point to the internet, there might be a forcing factor affiliated with it, but it also
Mhm,
is like a really interesting thing to keep digging into. Because I would love to know, like, would would someone have a similar identity exploration experience if they had that same level of freedom for in-person spaces as they do for online spaces? Or is online something magic and different? Like, is the
mm.
no body changing it? I don't know.
Well, and it also makes me wonder if we're maybe going to start seeing a regression into queer culture out in reality becoming more clandestine and more secretive again. Because if you're able online to explore and be so many different things in different places, pigeonholing yourself into a singular identity to go to a specific bar in a specific place, if you accidentally run into someone who knows you from online in a different space, it's going to completely change their idea of who you are. It's going to cause
Mm,
that collapse of identity. So
mm,
it almost makes me wonder, a, if that's why we're seeing if we're seeing queer spaces closing, especially like leather bars and the more kind of sex positive clubs and
mhm,
the gay bars that are really themed to a specific type of gay person.
mhm,
um and if we'll end up having more kind of like homogenous queer spaces where people are just kind of like all hanging out together doing whatever, like we work gay.
yeah.
um but versus the specific spaces, because people don't want to cause that identity collapse in
Mm,
reality. I don't know,
yeah.
I'm curious how that might work.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great kind of pivoting point, because one of the articles that you sent was talking about gender studies and using media as a teaching, using social media as a teaching format and a teaching
Mhm,
methodology. And I loved that the focus of that was that the personal is political, and that's such a it's kind of like a cliche almost at this
yeah.
point, that we're so used to saying it that we don't really know what it means anymore. So I was
Mhm.
wondering if you could tell me a little bit about that and what that meant for your study.
Yeah. So first thing I want to say, my co-author Dijane Leon was incredible. She's a classicist and a sociologist, and she was integral to this work. Um, the seed for the project started, I was teaching sociology of sex and gender, and the question was, how do I avoid just teaching out of a textbook? How to avoid just teaching a bunch of articles? Like there has to be another way to do this. And digital storytelling was the mechanism through which I framed my classes. And when I say digital storytelling, what I mean is using multimedia to convey a personal narrative. And so that is incredibly vague and is intentionally incredibly vague. When I say the personal is political. So the title of the article is Personal is Political Art. What I'm trying to convey is that as an undergrad, one of the key learning objectives that I had and that Dejanay and I talked a lot about was how can we help the students see sociological theory in their own life? So it's not just I went to swim class when I was 9. It's that swim class is raced and gendered and has like all of this political stuff around it. And sociological theory can actually help us better understand that personal experience. Doesn't make it not a great memory or a funny story, but it gives us more nuance and it helps us see the world differently. Um, that's how I use that phrase. I also use that phrase because it is something people know. I could have come up with something on my own, but I quite like it, and I hate that it gets used in so many ways that it does kind of it becomes almost like an empty sign. It gets so diluted, it doesn't mean anything. So that was my intention to try to bring it back a little bit more and say, think about your biography. Another Goffman thing. Think about your biography and how it is also a sociological text.
Well, and you also talked about the how those structures can affect everything, even down to the mundane, and mundanity is one of my like personal favorite things to talk about, because I feel like these grand big ideas are not what make us human, uh, because it's just those are great ideas that have been tossed around since the dawn of time. Like so many people have talked about these big ideas over and over and over again. They don't feel specific enough for me. The
Mhm.
things that make us human are the like silly things that we do in everyday life, the like what time we get out of bed in the morning, like how what we do when we first walk out the door, whether you look up at the sun and sneeze, like that kind of stuff, like the really the things you don't think about, that when you read about them in a journal or something you're like, oh my gosh, this is a human who wrote this. And it's so important to tie that into those political movements that are happening around us and how they have formed those habits, whether or not we know they have.
Mm.
um and I think that the our we are remiss in talking about that, to the point where we have so many people saying, oh, it's not that deep, when really everything we do has happened because of something that political, or because of just how people are moving through the world and the decisions they're making, whether or not we like the fact that that's how reality has existed. But things that people decisions someone made 2000 years ago are still affecting how we exist now. And I think that's an incredible point to make, especially at the undergrad level, where you're just kind of starting to learn those really important critical thinking skills and adjusting your thinking to questioning what's happening around you.
Yeah. I think that I think we're totally in agreement on this. I find that when I'm trying to teach social theory to folks who haven't learned it before, they could be students, they could just be people that I know. I like to use those like common social tropes. So like, why do we give people engagement rings is like a great example. And so how did the De Beers Diamond Company, how did they influence the way that diamond rings look and what are the fashion around it? And what are blood diamonds? What is geopolitical conflict doing? What is the African diaspora and the decimation of the African continent? How does that all relate to the thing that we think is just like a really cool event that could happen in someone's life? And it's such a Debbie Downer sometimes. Um, like I was talking to my husband earlier, and it was like 3 or 4 days ago, and I told him that story, and I was like, but the flip side, so yeah, diamonds, colonization, like all of these terrible things, but also the engagement ring, once someone get married, it was a way for women to keep property and have something that was worth money if they weren't allowed to have a bank account, which they weren't until the last, like a generation before us. So
Yep.
there's
Like
these
half a
things that
generation before us.
quite literally, it's like most people's parents or most people's like mother or grandmother were the first people in their
Yeah.
family to have a bank account and a credit card, maybe their mother. Like it, I think it's really important to know that. And then there's also this sort of like, it does make everything a little downbeat because most
Mm,
things tab back to a system of oppression because they've so influenced the fabric of our reality. We have to find those moments of resilience. So it's like, yes, a Dutch diamond company did influence the way that we think about love and marriage in the Western world. And also, it was another way that women were allowed to, or like found resistance and could own things that they weren't technically allowed to own previously. Like it, it gets hard to make the mundane sociological because it does end up being downbeat. So how do you put the pill in the marshmallow?
well, I mean, the song "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend" is a fun kind of like silly, oh yeah, haha,
Mhm.
it's cute. But then when you actually listen to the words and realize what she's saying, you're like, oh, you need this diamond because this is your only way of clawing your way back up when he leaves you.
That, yes, yes.
Well, and I mean, I don't know how many times I talked about this on the podcast, but that's one reason why I chose to live in Lyon for the time being, is because it is so the history here is so evident,
Hmm.
from Roman ruins and Neolithic archaeological sites to the old to my apartment is an old silk factory that was converted into apartments. But the reason why I'm bringing that up now is because the Lyon is where the jacquard loom was invented, and
Hmm.
the jacquard loom was a programmable loom so that you could weave a pattern in that would repeat perfectly every time. And the way you do that is by inserting a punch card into it, which may sound familiar.
It was a
And
computer.
the system that they used is what Ada Lovelace, who invented computer programming language, aka zeros and ones, uh, cited as her inspiration. And then IBM took Ada Lovelace's programming language and invented the modern computer. So without one really horrible man who was trying to like cheapen the labor by creating something that would program itself so he only needed one person running the loom instead of like three people running the loom, turned into how we're communicating now. So that's why I think the mundane is so important, because it's these little decisions, good or bad, that happened. I mean, that was in the 17th century, so like 500 years ago, affected us all the way forward in 2026
Mhm.
on a video call platform that could be working much better than it does. Or
Uh,
even when you're talking about, if you're talking about technology, you're talking about Star Trek and how Star Trek influenced technology, but it also
mhm.
influenced, during the Cold War, it showed that people from different backgrounds could all work together towards a common goal. And you had Lucille Ball, who was producing it.
Mhm.
And so there's so many things that tie into everything else that you can't. I think that's where my frustration with "it's not that deep" comes from, is it's not that that phrase is being used so people don't have to think critically. It's that there's so much history that's so interesting, and there's so many people behind every single thing we do, that it's you're doing a disservice to yourself if you're not taking the time to learn it.
Mm. I I always want to like I want to say hold space, and then I want to do the like wicked meme. But I always want to hold space also that, and so like maybe this is spicy, whatever. Fascism thrives on people who are overwhelmed and distracted. And that's like one of the
Mm.
playbooks, that's like one of the pages in the playbook that we've seen for centuries at this point. I am I completely agree that if we know more about the history, know more about the context, know about where things come from, we can better navigate the world and make more informed decisions. And I struggle because there's like a structural lever that's been pulled that wants and encourages and makes all of us so overwhelmed, especially in a world where we have access to incredible amounts of information to the point where it is actually too much. And it's been designed to be overwhelming and too much and constantly fed and impact attention spans and all these other pieces that it can get really hard to actually sit and read that article about like where did the computer come from? You would like I work in tech spaces and I will often share stories about like um, so when you're, this is so silly, when you're trading securities, you, instead of using a punch card, it would be a reel. So it was like one long piece of paper that had the whole thing. And
Mm,
that was the inspiration for blockchain. Because if you tore the paper, people
mm,
would always see that it was mended. And so blockchain became like, that was the analogy that blockchain used. I will tell people these stories when we're talking about tech. And I always want to be like, how do you not know that? You also work in this space. And then I'm like, well, wait, we have 17 trillion things happening and the world constantly feels like it's on fire. Um, so I agree that I like when things are deep, and I want to imagine a world where we are able to engage with the depth. I think
yeah.
that's like my goal.
Yeah. I mean, as a millennial, I remember taking computer classes as a kid, and yet I still know very little about how computers actually work. Like when I was working as an office manager in IT in New York, and I remember sitting there as they were training one of the new hires, one of the interns, and they were teaching them about the internet and what the internet is, and they were talking about the cables on the ocean floor, and I whipped around and I was like, what? Excuse me, the internet
Yep.
is what? And
Yep.
I was 30. I was just like, I'm sorry, you're telling me that our entire lives right now are based on something that has to be repaired because sharks bite it?
And that is how most people learn about it is the shark attacks. Like
Yes.
because we put freaking metal where the sharks live. So of course they're gonna be like, what is this thing? It is
And it's
so
releasing
wild.
energy, and that's how they find their prey, is by electrical signals. And so they're attracted to it, and they're like, why are there electrical signals coming off of this? I need to attack it.
Mm-hmm. Uh, yep. Yep. It is
Our world is
so,
crazy.
it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And I always think of Henry Ford in these moments where I'm like, you popularized us breaking down tasks into these really small pieces, and you moved labor from something that lived in a house or that was like someone had a swath of expertise into chunks. And so I think of you
Mm-hmm.
as an IT manager in that role, but because we have this like Ford model, you don't have to know everything. You have to be really good at one thing. You have to be deep, not broad, which is funny. We're talking
Mm-hmm.
about deep. And so because you're deep, not broad, you're not incentivized to learn these things. You're not trained to learn these things. And it's actually really lucky that that young person got taught that because they otherwise wouldn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is another example of it's just that's just how work is. Like I'm just really good at my one thing. And we don't think about where that came from or why, how there was a world where at one point you had to be an expert in everything about your thing. Um,
Well, and it would have been really easy for the IT guy to just kind of be like, yeah, where did you think the internet came from? Like it was just in the sky or something. Like, but he didn't. And he actually like explained how the cables worked and why they worked and why like some of them are private and some of them are public, and like went into that, which was invaluable to me as someone who was dealing like client facing, to
mhm,
be able to, sure, I'm not talking about the internet cables with the people who are working with, but knowing even a little bit about what the IT guys are doing, I can better know, oh, this is a person that I need to bring this issue to. This is the person I need to bring this issue to because I know what they know now. Um, but then so okay, so again, another pivot because you have the
ready.
problem that a lot of us sociologists have, that we love to research everything and anything all at once, and so you
Yep.
can't ever
Uh-huh.
decide on something because it's all interesting and it
Yep.
all fits.
Hmm.
um but you sent over a paper about Night Vale, which is fantastic.
Did you read it?
um I read part of it, yes.
Oh, thank you.
And haven't listened to Welcome to Night Vale in a very long time, and it inspired me to resubscribe and listen to it from the beginning. But the thing that I took from that paper was that, because memory is something that I dealt with in my thesis as well, and how well we remember things and how our remembering of things is what informs our identity.
Mhm.
And I thought it was so interesting thinking about it in that fun and quirky way of like of purposeful forgetting, but then also purposeful remembering,
Mhm.
and how that works both culturally and individually, and how that informs our identities. So I was just wondering if you could expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love Welcome to Night Vale. I am so far behind.
Oh yeah.
I'm quite far behind. So I'm not, this will be no spoilers about the show. Um, so the theory behind that article comes from Peter Burke and Jan Stetz. And so that duo have a conceptualization of what an identity is. And so they also have exception to what the self is. When you think of the self, you're thinking of um, like George Herbert Mead. So they're really basing on like Mead has this whole long, I mean, this would be 5 books, it'd be a whole podcast just on like what does Mead say the self is. So Mead has a self. Pause here, go skim that article, come back. So Burke and Stess are saying, okay, we have Mead, we have all this self stuff, but how does an identity work? And so what they say is that an identity has a core meaning. And so there's like some definition. So it might be like a sentence, it might be an idea, it might be a feeling, but there's some core meaning. And our experiences are what help us better understand that core meaning because we've lived it. Because their whole thing is identities have to be verified within interactions because they are sociologists at heart. Um, but how does an experience and a core meaning stick together? They say, well, you have to remember it. And it's like
Mm.
kind of throwaway. And this, like, it changed my neurochemistry reading this because it's something where, like, well, yeah, you have to remember an experience. If you don't remember it, how does it stick? And I was like, well, what happens if you don't remember it? And so that really moved me here. And so within Welcome to Night Vale, there are characters that have different experiences around memory. And so there's one character who has um, this like it sounds like a traumatic experience in his youth that he just has completely forgotten. And he finds a tape recording of something that sounds like a traumatic experience. And he's rediscovering that event. And in rediscovering it, it causes him to think, who is he? And it gives him, in some ways, like a crisis of faith or a crisis of identity, an identity crisis, which is we see those in tropes in medias all the time. But if we think about that more sociologically, does that change who he is? Yes or no. There's another character in Night Vale who is someone who that no one else can remember. It's when you stop looking at this person, you no longer remember that you've ever interacted with them, despite if you spent an hour with them, you don't remember that hour. It's just gone. What I'm asking in that text, and this is my first media studies paper, what I'm asking in that text is, can we actually trouble the idea that you have to remember something for it to be important? And so if we've forgotten something, what does forgetting do for us? My argument is that remembering is really neat. And so if I have an experience that feels identity related and I remember it, that is a neat story. It is very clean and it is predictable that that will have an impact on my identity. The weight of it will have a lot of variables, which a psychologist could then like norm, they could identify, and they could map. We can probably figure that out. But if we forget something, what are the pieces that stick around when we forget? And this is going like beyond the article, just how I'm thinking about this. What are the pieces that stick around? And so oftentimes when folks forget things, it can be completely gone. And then the remembrance will change things for them. So if you have no recollection that you ever um, took a vacation as a child, and all of a sudden you see photos that like every summer you went to these amazing vacations, suddenly you might feel like, wow, I didn't know how world traveled I was, but also a little afraid that you don't remember these big and impactful things. So it will cause you to reevaluate your identity. And these experiences suddenly get stuck on, but it's not, okay, I went on a cruise when I was 10. That's not what's getting stuck. It's, wow, I went on a cruise and I forgot about it. And here are the stories that I'm finding get stuck. And so, how does that then change the way you think about yourself? It might not, but it might in a big way. And so, the forgetting and the remembering is a variable we have to think about, and the feeling associated with it. Someone, and often in trauma studies, will talk about Someone may forget a discrete event, like they may have a dissociative fugue, they may have like a neurological trauma, there may be some harm that makes someone forget a course of events, but then there's still some impact. And it could be something like somatic symptoms, like a touch sensitivity. It could be like a startle response. It could be like a kink or a fetish. Like there's things that could be like that could feel good or aversive, and we don't want to put it one way or the other. But that does stick around.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think that only the things you remember influence your identity, then you're pretending that all of those things are irrelevant to who the person is. So I
Yeah.
don't give a clear answer, but I want us to trouble that.
Yeah. Well, and memory is such a frustrating thing anyway, because and this is where my research strayed into that, into psychology briefly, because I was dealing with social media, and social media
Mhm.
hinges on memory and trying to get you to think that you're posting your story and interacting with it on a historical level. Meanwhile, it's just data collection.
Mhm.
um but your memory of those events often differs from what actually happened,
Mhm.
because you're remembering things in a way that fits the narrative that you're building for yourself, whether or not you have social media. There's a
Mhm.
narrative of yourself in your mind, and so there are certain memories that you're going to adjust slightly. And I was finding that in my research as people were looking at their social media timelines, specifically their Facebook timelines, being like,
Mhm.
oh, I completely forgot about being friends with that person, or
Mhm.
oh, I remembered being so much more political on my Facebook, and then looking at it and there's no politics anywhere at all.
Mhm.
So even your interpretation of how you are moving through life plays into that narrative of your identity, whether or not it actually happened in
Yes.
that way.
Yeah. And there's this is where I'll be the most light neurological I can be. Um, so when after I close my eyes to like visualize the textbook, memories are encoded electrochemically. And so it is like I feel like in high school biology we'll talk about like two neurons touch and then that is a connection. It's more complicated than that, but we can imagine it. Short-term memory is a really simple circuit. Long-term memory is a much more diffuse circuit. You can think of it that is the highest level I can say it. When you reactivate a long-term memory, you can think of it as like we're turning that circuit on and we're using it, but in using it, it can change a little bit. And so when you
Mm-hmm.
re-remember something, you could remember it in a way that is different than how it originally happened. So, what I would be curious about with your participants is if someone is re-remembering a story and they tell it to you, what happens if they, like, over time, keep thinking, like, oh, yeah, I was like so political as a kid. I was like a radical as a kid. And it just gets more and more and more. And it's like almost like the fish story. And then confronted with the reality of they posted one go out and vote in 2009 and then that's it. I'm curious what the identity implications are if your memories feel true and they change over time because it's an organ, it's a body, it keeps moving and growing and changing and not just in degrading. Sometimes a story will change and we remember and how we retell it. um, it just makes me curious, like what's going to happen when you're confronted with something that's like objective, like it's almost like reading a diary and being like, I can't
Yeah.
believe that.
Well, and I think there's also one of the points to be made is there's a difference when you're interacting with the world. There's a difference between intention and reality.
Hmm.
And even if something might look innocuous from the outside, you could be intending it very politically.
Mhm.
Like reposting something from To Write Love on Her Arms might feel really super political to you at 15.
Yeah.
And then you look back on it at 35 and you're like, it's a pithy quote about nothing.
Yeah.
So even though from the outside it has no meaning, the intention behind it still lingers. And so your memory of that post is going to be, I used to post lots of super political things. I used to be way more obvious about my queerness online than I actually was, when
Mm.
you start looking at that timeline. And so that intentionality is that story that gets built up in your mind that ends up influencing your identity as an adult.
I'm so curious. Sorry, can I ask you a follow-up question about that?
Sure, go for it. I don't know if I'll have the answer because that's definitely something that I need to again flesh out, but yeah, go for it.
So what happens, I guess from you have this like really cool theoretical lens on this. What happens if people are remembering an event, but social media is like data that is owned by a company to sell, and sometimes that data can be deleted or lost. Like what happens if posts are gone? Like what do people do if they're like, oh, I think I'm so political, but the thing that they were posting is like deleted or it's gone or those posts are now banned? What happens?
Mm.
Like what, I guess, did any of your participants have that experience?
There were a few situations where things were missing. There, for instance, I originally went into my study looking at the years 2008 to 2015 because Facebook went fully public in 2008, and then
Mhm.
I didn't want to get into modern politics by pushing it into 2016, so I just
Yeah.
said 2015 done. Um, but I ended up shifting it to 2009 to 2015 because posts in 2008, because there weren't direct messages on Facebook yet, basically everything on someone's Facebook timeline was half of a conversation. Um, and
Interesting.
and if the other person had deleted their Facebook, you didn't have the other half of the conversation anymore. So you just had to kind of assume what the conversation was about.
Mhm.
And so it made it very confusing, and so I was just like, I'm not dealing with this. Let's just push it forward to 2009. DMs have existed now, and now we're just going to see what people want to present to the world on their timelines. But in situations where like uh I didn't run into any situations where a person's like pictures were deleted from them without their knowledge or things like that. But every once in a while, there would be like a repost from Grey's Anatomy or Once Upon a Time or something where the page was defunct. And so the media didn't come up anymore.
Mhm.
But at that point, it still says what the page was that was deleted and why, and that the media is no longer available. So I was still able to get a certain amount of information from it because they're clearly watching typically gay TV shows in 2010.
Mhm.
Great.
Yeah.
I like it still gave a certain amount of information. Um but that's one reason why I really urge people not to I know in today's political activist climate, we want to just delete our social medias. And I'm like, please don't. just don't. And if you have
Mhm.
to, because it's taking over your life and you don't want to be and you don't want to be a cog in that wheel, at least download the archive of it, and then delete it. You can on all social media, there's a button that you can click that downloads your entire timeline archive into a PDF that you can download, and it's thousands of pages long. If you want to delete your Facebook, do that. So we at least still have the information somewhere. But as a cultural historian and sociologist, it hurts so much when someone's like, "I'm deleting my Facebook. Goodbye, everyone." I'm like, information and all of the people who are reposting your things, what are you doing? um but yeah, it ended up being more interesting. I suppose the perceptions that people had looking at their past selves became the interesting thing rather than the because I went into the study wanting to see if queer people used Facebook politically,
Mhm.
and it was clear by the third interview that they weren't, because Facebook was not considered to be anything other than like a fun side thing that you did.
Mhm.
So no one was taking it seriously. And so it shifted very quickly into watching these people have identity crises basically by
Yeah.
looking at their past selves and being like, who is this person? And then also for those who didn't identify as queer at that time, who now do, is there evidence of their queerness on those pages even before they knew it? And the answer was
Mm.
yes. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
You are a queer person, whether or not you know you're a queer person, aka
Hmm.
everyone's a queer person.
Mm.
That's a different topic for a different time.
That's your second
Um,
book.
no, there are other people that are writing those papers currently, and I'm very glad they are because they get to catch the heat and not me. Um, but I suppose to answer your question, that wasn't that wasn't really my focus. And the times where things did show up as deleted or gone didn't overshadow the overarching experience of someone looking at their pages. That probably was not satisfactory answer, but
There is very little in sociology that feels super satisfying, but that was
I
intellectually
know
fascinating. So I'm grateful.
it.
Sorry to put you on the spot for that.
No, that's why this is a conversation. I appreciate it. But so I just want to kind of wrap up this conversation by asking what are you currently researching? Are you currently researching something?
Um,
Are you still teaching?
no, so I'm not still teaching. My last, so I in academia land, I had my own research lab, Ghost Lab. My last mentee is finishing up her dissertation. And so I am like coming to the end of an era for me, and I'm so excited for her. She just got a job that she's obsessed with. So we're looking forward to her defending and scheduling and everything. So I work full time as a researcher for a large financial institution, and so I'm doing research studies constantly. It's not in the same domain; it's much more UX. So, like UX being user experience research. Um, my big focus are like why do people use the internet in certain ways? Why do people use apps in certain ways? And then what are the ways that we can design a better experience? So like an innocuous example might be like two-factor authentication is annoying. Everyone hates it, but it is useful and it is like incredibly like safe, but it is annoying and
Worst.
everyone hates it. So like a UX study would be what's a way to make two-factor authentication better? Or what's a way to safely log into an app that has sensitive information without it just making you want to gouge your eyes out. So like that would be the kind of that's like the kind of work that I do. These are much more rapid studies instead of like that teaching paper that we talked about. I spent about a year and a half working on it. For these studies, I'm usually spending about 2 to 3 weeks on a study. So they're much
Mhm.
more smaller in scope. They're much more agile, much more like directly applicable. Not a lot of broad theorizing. So I don't necessarily do the same kind of research anymore. This has been like a big pivot to go from public health into user experience research.
I mean, but that's an important part of the journey that I think people should hear about, and it really fits into my ethos of education, of that education is the ends, it's not an ends to a means.
Mhm.
um but you're still using the skills that you learned in academia in order to inform your current work. So it's, I think people think that school should be a one-to-one, this is what I'm studying, so therefore I'm doing something literally with what I studied,
Mhm.
when in reality academia is just beefing up skills, networking, all of that kind of stuff that then can help you later in life if you are wanting to use it.
Yeah, and so something I would say is that, and like things might be different in Europe, I don't think they are, but at least in the United States, doctoral programs are framed around an apprenticeship model. I don't know that all faculty members would actually realize that's what they're doing, but it's the idea of I am an expert in this thing. I'm going to match with a student who wants to be an expert in this thing so they can become like me but different. And so I will match with a social psychologist so I can be a social psychologist. You study emotion, I study identity. Like it is typically a nuanced difference so we can have that academic lineage. Something I would encourage folks when they're thinking about graduate school, especially in doctoral programs, is that there's this phenomenon of your mentor is a has dug so deep into one specific area and one specific industry, and most of the old guard of faculty have only ever been faculty members. So I can talk from my own experience. moving from academia into tech, I had to find new mentors and I had to find new words to describe my skills. And I found things that we were so precious about, so they were so integral to my career as a sociologist, didn't necessarily matter in another space. So like moving into tech, saying I can do theory construction didn't matter, but saying I can draw detailed diagrams that explain complicated phenomenon were actually a super marketable skill. And that helped me get my first job where I was doing journey mapping. And it was
Mm.
a phenomenal connection. My academic faculty couldn't know that because they've never worked in tech, and many of them were finishing grad school before computers were around. So how would they know what this works now? I say that to say that academia is, if the apprenticeship model fails, if you're trying to move outside of academia. And so that's when I would encourage folks to think, just like you said, what are the skills that you're building? And then also speaking to as many people we can in different roles, always keeping the diversity of perspective. And then more than anything, remembering that a norm within one job market is not the norm within another job market. Um,
Yeah.
Title matters a lot less in some industries, matters a lot more in others. There are incredible nuances. And you'll only know that by meeting people who do something very, very different than what you do.
I mean, for me on my resume, as I'm trying to find like creative director jobs and marketing jobs and things, I don't say, oh, I'm a researcher. I say I'm a story maker.
That's a
I
good one.
I find ways to integrate communities. I like you just change your language just a little bit.
Mhm.
Even as a tour guide, I can use that as like a,
Yeah.
oh, I know how to interface with clients and about large scale subjects in small scale digestible ways.
I
Like
love that.
there are ways to, yeah, there are ways to use the skills that you have. You just have to learn the terms for the industry that you're moving into for those skills.
Yeah. If I was going to say it like a sociologist, I would say there are conversational norms, and like you have to
Mm.
learn the conversational norm. And that could be around vocab, it could be around focus, interest, length of time. There's just norms. Just like if you go to a new place, the way people talk is different. So like me moving from New York to Atlanta, very different conversational norms that I had to learn. And then when I moved
Oh
back to
yeah.
New York, I had to relearn New York norms, and they had changed in the years I was gone. So I would encourage folks to think there are norms, there are expectations, there are rules, and like you learn them from people who are already there and have already like been socialized into them. If you're a sociologist, use your sociology skills. If you're an ethnographer, use your ethnography skills. Um, be curious, and you'll figure it out.
Mhm. That's the best word right there. Be curious. Which is a great segue into the final section of the podcast, which is the synthesis questions. This is the time where I ask a set of 7 questions to all of my guests. So don't think about the answers too hard, just whatever
Mhm.
comes to mind. Question number 1, what is your typical executive dysfunction and or rest day activity?
Playing Final Fantasy 14 and not checking my phone.
Mm, I have learned the do not disturb button is my best friend.
Yes.
Question 2, what is your favorite setting for working on your research?
Um, I if I'm in data collection, anywhere that has a seat, that's great. So like I'm thinking when I was in academia, anywhere I could sit it was the perfect place to do research. If I'm in analysis, I need somewhere, usually like a cafe. I love like caffeine. I love somewhere where I can have a wall to my back to a wall. That's great. In tech world, on my couch. That's like I love a couch. I love a sofa.
What is one thing an advisor has told you that has stuck with you? And this could be good or bad.
Um, Only say yes. And so this is Dr. Morgan Philbin, my postdoc mentor said this, and it's stuck with me for years. Only say yes if it serves you substantively, methodologically, or provides people as capital.
If you could choose any other area of research, what would you choose and why?
I, hands down, would be a media studies person, like 1,000%. Yeah. In another life, that's me.
It's a fun area of research and you can do a lot with it.
Yep.
Who is one other academic whose research you really admire?
Oh my God, there's so many. Jeez. Damn, coming in with the hard questions in the 11th
I know,
hour.
I love
Um,
it.
oh my God. Oh God. I like need to, can I look
If
at
you
my
need,
bookshelf?
sure.
I
If you need
oh
like
my
three
God.
names, go for it. I'll
I
give you more than one.
oh my God. So oh my God. I mean, if we're talking like anybody in the universe, so like Irving Goffman for giving us like presentation of self in everyday life, frame analysis, just his corpus is bananas. Um Gramsci for talking through like hierarchies and giving us like an organizational structure that we can use to talk about power. Um, and the third one, I would say Anna Freud would be my third one, because it is incredibly challenging to come up as like a stellar researcher under the shadow of someone whose name lay people know regularly, and her theorizing is phenomenal. Like I love Anna Freud's work, so I think she would be my third.
What is a question you've never been able to answer?
Ooh, do you have a domain of question or just any?
Any question.
I knew you were gonna freaking say that. Okay. Uh,
Especially since I'm talking to someone who adores vague, open-ended questions.
I know. I live in that. God. See,
It's coming back to haunt you.
my father used to always say, "Don't open a door if you're not prepared to walk through it." And I opened those doors, so I gotta.
Hmm.
I a question that I've never been able to answer, which I've always been curious about, is what is an identity? I think we have lots
Mm.
of really interesting definitions. None of them feel sufficient. And so when I was in academia, I feel like, well, what is an identity? I was like, wow, that I would say that,
In what respect?
yeah, give me a context, give me a scenario. No, but I would say, what is an identity?
It's kind of like asking what is consciousness,
Hmm.
and I don't think we'll ever get to that
Yeah,
answer.
yeah. It's like, what is self? Tab back 45 minutes. I was like, oh, well, here's 5 books to read to get an idea. It's just like any of those things, like what is some core facet of human life, like a self or an
Mm.
identity or a community. Like it's so hard to define, and any definition feels incredibly surface level.
We live in too low of a dimension to be able to look that far outside of ourselves.
You are so right. So it's like art, like the watchers, the collectors, all those other people, those other entities are the ones who know, and we're like
The
fumbling
Lectroids
forward.
of the eighth dimension. We need them to tell us.
Correct, but like we won't understand their language.
Nope. Oh well. And then finally, what font do you wish you could present your research in?
Oh my God, that's a really fun one. I am such like a serif font girly. I love like a Times New Roman. And that's so basic, but I just love something that reminds me of like an old newspaper. So think like that, even
Mm,
if it was like a typewriter font, something like that. But if I had to pick one from like MS Word, I would say Times New Roman. It's just very like
mm.
classic, even if it's not like fun, because I'm like, I want you to feel important reading this.
Ooh, I like that. And where can people find you online?
Um,
Can they?
I don't really have, it's so funny. Since I pivoted to industry, I don't really have the same social media presence. You can find me on LinkedIn. Um, but
Good
beyond
old
that, I don't,
LinkedIn.
yeah, since moving into academia, a lot of the work that or excuse me, since moving into corporate, a lot of the work that I do is much more under NDA. So I don't necessarily publicize as much, but folks can find me on LinkedIn. I think that'll be the easiest way to like connect and chat, especially folks who are interested in pivoting from academia to another industry. I'm happy to chit chat in that way. Um, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for being on the pod, and thank you to everyone listening, and we will talk to you all later. Bye. Thank you again to Dr. Michael Patrick Vaughn for being a guest on the podcast. It was so wonderful to get to catch up with you again. And I really hope our conversation sparked some interest in some of you out there and maybe unlocked some worries that you have had about being in academia and whether or not it can translate to the real world. But also just how to relate to the people around you and how to relate to yourself. So thank you again for being a part of this conversation. If you would like to submit questions to us to be part of our smaller episodes, please submit those on Instagram at hypothesispod, via email at podcasthypothesis@gmail.com, or audio questions to speakpipe.com/hypothesis podcast. As always, you can find all of the articles on our Substack, iramcintosh.substack.com. That's iramcintosh.substack.com. Please follow all of our socials. On Instagram, that's hypothesispod, or myself at Ira A. McIntosh, or on TikTok at hypothesispod or the gay ethnographer. You can please subscribe, rate, review, and share these episodes. These episodes go nowhere if it isn't for our community. So please, if you like what you hear, please share it with your friends. If you don't like what you hear, tell us so we can make it better. We're not here just to shout into the void. We're here to open up academia to the rest of the world. Let's fight misinformation together. Have a wonderful day and go read a book. Bye.